We are going to start. We need the full time today. Dr. Karen Orcott is with us again, facilitating our session, and she has a great topic that is important to all of us. And she has done so much research in this area. So I welcome Dr. Orcott, and I thank all of you for joining. I know that there will be more people joining in as they find time in their busy schedules. So thank you, and here's to you, Dr. Orcott.
Well, thank you and good morning, everyone. Thank you for bearing with us while we did a little bit of old home week there. We're going to start out in some small groups this morning. We're going to take about 10 minutes and discuss this question. And I want you to think about this for a moment and think about, we face stressors in our life every single day. From the time we pull out of our driveway and are trying to keep up with traffic to the time that we get to our office, and we just increasing the stressors that are on us throughout the day. And what we're talking about this morning is not how we cope with those stressors, but it's something at a very much deeper level. So the question for you as you move into small groups is, when do you need to call on this thing called resiliency? It's something that lives deep within us. And it's not a coping skill. It's not a constant kind of stress reliever. It is this thing that we have to call in on deep within us called resiliency. So I'm going to ask you to take about 10 minutes in your small groups and choose someone to share out as we come back to a large group. And thank you and have some fun, and then we'll come back for presentation. Okay, well, welcome back. So let's hear from some of the groups and tell us what you talked about as you talked about what you have, when you have to call upon resiliency. So group number one, or any group, can begin.
This is Heidi Hahn with Brainerd. We were group one, and we had amazing people in our group. So Dave, just so you know, we needed more time together. Because this is a great topic. Very vast leadership within our group, just from new to metro to rural to special ed. And we really talked about, I think Rhonda said it great in our group about we've been developing resiliency since we stepped into classrooms. And currently where education's at, we're really relying on that and surrounding ourselves with people that support us in our roles, and then just being really grounded in our why. And when things get tough, making sure we go back to the places where we have our why affirmed.
Thank you, Heidi. Group two.
I'll take group two. We also had an amazing group. One of the things that we talked about was a lot of us seem to be in places where we can deal with conflict that maybe isn't our own. And when you do that, you tend to either have one happy group and one mad group, or two mad groups in the end, depending upon what the result is. And so just making sure your own compass, you rely on your own compass for those projects. And Bernadette had a really good answer, is that she was involved in a lot of I can't even say that word, really horrible board meetings. And when she went to the college level, she talked about how she didn't have those board meetings anymore, but she was dealing with students and others who were kind of aggressive. And instead of, acting that way in return, she kind of just talked about, this is how you're coming off. And so just making sure you're true to yourself and you don't take those aggressions to heart. And then a couple of us too talked about how sometimes when we're overwhelmed, just kind of taking a step back and looking at, what's on our plate, and maybe putting some of it on the dessert plate for later.
Okay, thank you, Cindy. Group number three, or any group can speak up.
I'm part of group number three. And I too, this is an amazing little conference, and women are just amazing with the knowledge that they have. So we talked a lot about, I loved what Shelley had said, that resilience for her is really all the time, that she's like a weeble. Sometimes she wobbles, but she doesn't fall down. I love that. Now that's going to stick with me for a while. I think every day is different. Some people said that it's hard to not be resilient because that's the work we're in. It's really challenging work, and you have that mental mindset. You center yourself first, whether you're running to a crisis. You have learned to really think quickly and be calm so that you're a role model for others. You learn, you ask, what did I learn from these situations? How can I be better? Or, where do I need to go next? I think reflection is key, and that's what we've learned to do that keeps us resilient. And then some reach out, which I do this as well, reach out to those rational adults around you when things don't seem so rational. And I think having your group, your circle of close knit colleagues who can help you through things and talk through things and support you is very important. And I think lastly, one of our colleagues said, sometimes it's good to know when it's time to make a change in education. Maybe you just need to shift into another position. And then my thought is really, when I'm here, I'm all in, but I have to remember there's no work-life balance. There's no 50-50. So when I am away and enjoying friends and family, then I'm all in with my family too. And we have to remember that that's really important, to have fun every day, laugh, try to slow down if possible, but that's not always possible.
That's great. Thank you, Paula.
Mhm.
Group number 4. Or any group that has not reported
can-
back. Go
I
ahead.
can speak for us. Our group is doing some amazing work. We talked about some of the soul searching and time to really think back to affirming ourselves and things coming at us constantly, and then really taking that time away from it to think about, okay, how else can I address this situation, or who do I need to go back and apologize to, and who do I need to do some repair with? Being human, slowing things down as much as possible, dealing with the unexpected, and remembering that our resiliency isn't just needed in our professional lives, but also in our personal lives, and being able to balance both of those things, that you need to be resilient with your personal life so that you can go and support your school and district as best you can, and vice versa. Finding a lot of increase in staff in distress at this moment, and both balancing their need for assistance and guidance and mentorship with your own overwhelmedness, and taking the time to do that. And then finding some tools to really deal with those sorts of when other people are in distress. So I just keep thinking back to the metaphor of the umbrella. Are you an umbrella or a funnel? And when we're resilient, we can be an umbrella and shield our staff and our students from the stress. And when we're stressed, we funnel it all. So how do we balance that?
Thank you, Marcy. Great stuff. And the final group. Is there a spokesperson for group 5? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on. Thank you all for your sharing.
Here, I'll jump in for group 5.
Okay, thank you, Anthony.
Yeah, so we just talked a little bit about, making sure that we're doing the best decisions that we can for kids, keeping them in focus, being resilient through the difficult times, and through those times when we make decisions that we know not everybody is going to approve of or be happy with, really calling on those resiliency skills at that time, to keep us able to be moving forward.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, so thank you for your work with the groups. They got bigger as we went on, so your time was limited. We apologize for that. So we will move into presentation now, and I'm going to share with you both some research that I have done and some research that I have collected from others. So we're going to start out with a quote from Cooper and Sawoff. And Cooper and Sawoff are the people who looked into emotional intelligence originally, and they found in the late 90s, they found that people in business, that there were people that should be more successful than they were, and that they were failing. And they were failing because of this thing called resiliency, and they were not able to come back from situations or from very difficult situations or deal with change. And that's a lot about resiliency is when we're into change that we have not opted into, that has not been a choice for us, and how we move past that and make it a positive change. So the quote from Cooper and Sawoff is, history reminds us that over the course of a lifetime, most notable men and women have encountered periods of rough going. They have had to face daunting obstacles and endure failure or setbacks. And how we respond to these challenges afterward with reflection transforms us, it shapes our future and that of the people around us. So next slide. So the quote about it affects those around us is a pretty critical feature here. The way that we respond to obstacles or failures is important to our lives and to our work. And there's been actual research on resiliency and how people with strong resiliency have an advantage in the workplace. They have an advantage in life. They are typically chosen for things over other people. But the manner in which we respond will also affect the people around us. And in leadership positions, it will affect the organization. And there is research saying there is a direct tie between our resiliency as leaders and the effect on the organization, and whether the organization is a resilient organization or whether the organization becomes neurotic. Next slide. So how do you respond to extreme setbacks? And again, we're not talking about life stressors, we're talking about extreme setbacks. And here are some things that people do during times of extreme setbacks. Some people explode, some people have emotional tantrums, some implode, some shut down, some blame others, and some go numb. And typically people in leadership, which you all are people who are coping and rebounding. And next slide, please. So I said that resilient people have an advantage. There is research saying that people are chosen more often for leadership if they are resilient. There is something that we are able to read in people, that we understand that they're more resilient people, and they are chosen for leadership. They are retained more often in jobs. They are hired more often for jobs, and they are better at learning on the job and responding to change on the job. They are better in illness situations, and they are better with difficult situation and problem solving and taking on more responsibility. So that is the advantage. Those are the advantages that you have if you are a resilient person. And next slide talks about resilient people and a few features that resilient people have. They orient more quickly to new realities, again, dealing with change. And they cope with change in more functional ways. And they spiral upward during times of change, and they become stronger than before. And that, again, is another critical feature of resilient people. It is not just about bouncing back. It's about becoming stronger than before and becoming better than before. And next slide. Blaming others will block you from bouncing back. And next slide. Blaming organizations, this is what we typically see in a lot of people, that they will blame organizations for situations or for change, or when we are in states of change, they will blame the government, they will blame administrators, or any person or group. If you're into a blaming mode, you are in a non-resilient, victim-like state. And next slide. Resiliency and resilient people refers to the ability to cope well with high levels of disruptive change. So those are, again, significant life events. The research calls these disruptive changes in our lives significant life events. So it's not just the stressors of our work, but it's when a significant life event hits us. It's when we've dealt with a loss, or when we've dealt with a major change in our life that creates this disruptive change. They're able to bounce back from those setbacks. They're able to overcome adversity and change to new situations when the old is no longer possible. Next slide. So in the research that I did, we looked at educational administrators. When you look at the general population, to answer that question of when do you need to call on resiliency, in the general population, it typically is more, again, with dealing with losses or dealing with a change in your life that you have not chosen, or dealing with disruption in your life that you have not chosen. When we looked at educational administrators and how when they were needing to call on resilience, when they were actually saying it is too difficult to cope at this point and I need to go deeper. It was when problems were chronic. So they reported that problems became chronic and that's when they had to go deep within them. Or when they were dealing with frequent stress that was coming at them in a very rapid setting, or when they were dealing with things that were personal in nature, they had to call on resiliency. When things were going along fine, but then it became personal, they were having trouble depersonalizing it. They also reported a need to call on resiliency when they had lost their mission. So we heard people saying things like, I wonder why I do this job anymore. I did not go into education to be doing this all the time. And also factors of isolation. So when you're dealing with a situation or when you're dealing with situations that you simply cannot share with others, and they were having more difficulty and needing to call on resiliency. So in moving forward, and I'll do the next slide here, moving beyond, the same administrators reported that these were the activities they typically were involved in when they hit that low spot and needed to go higher. They were informing others around them. They were quickly informing others and letting them know of the situation that they were dealing with. You mentioned in your feedback from small groups, the ability to reflect. Reflecting was reported by educational administrators that they needed to be able to take time to reflect on the situation. And the additional research shows us that reflection is a critical component for people who need resiliency or need to call upon resiliency. So taking time and sitting back and reflecting and seeking information or seeking consultation from others was another effort to move beyond the situation. And sometimes escaping was a need as well. Either literal escaping for a while from the situation and coming back to it was a thing that helped people move beyond, or sometimes escaping the situation in a more defined way. Next slide. So as we look at living in resiliency, it tends to be a culture. It tends to be a culture in our own lives. So it deals with having the ability to view oneself as resilient. So that is, we have to understand that we are resilient people and see ourselves as resilient people in order to live in resiliency. And it's also viewing oneself as having the ability to recover from situations. And our language indicates our expectation for ourselves. And that is proven over and over again. You can hear in your own language, you can hear in others' language, their ability to live in resiliency or to become resilient in any situation. Next slide. Resiliency is no one single behavior or no one single capacity. It is clusters of skills. So as we think about resiliency, it is cultural in nature. It lives within self-efficacy, that ability to believe that you can affect the end result of something, that what you do will matter, is self-efficacy. And that resiliency lives within self-efficacy. It lives within problem solving and social competencies. Next slide. So let's take a moment and talk a little bit about people who are resilient and some of the traits that have been found in the research for people who are resilient. So next slide, as we think about one of the things that researchers have found is that people who are extremely resilient have paradoxical personality traits. So paradoxical complexity increases resiliency and emotional intelligence. And optimistic thinking with practical pessimism is what paradoxical personality is. So you are an optimistic thinker, but you have practical pessimism within your optimistic thinking, if that makes sense to you. So you are a both and thinker. You can think of things as being both and. Next slide. So those are counterbalance traits, and paradoxical problem solving is a counterbalancing of traits. So if you are a paradoxical person, if you do exhibit paradoxical personality traits, you are both extroverted and introverted. You can be both extroverted and introverted. You can be both thoughtful and outgoing. You can be serious and humorous. You can be self-confident, but also self-critical. I often say the gift of, some people don't have the gift of self-critical nature. And you can also be hardworking and have the ability to do nothing. You know, people that are unable to ever relax or are able to just chill out or do nothing. The next slide. People who are resilient are extremely flexible. They are adaptable. They are thriving in situations of change, and they have the ability to create good luck out of tough situations or out of a change situation. They are able to take the element that is the difficult situation and turn it into some type of good luck. Next slide. We're going to take a moment and take a look at some of the research that has been done in the area of resiliency, and a lot of it is both related to background. It is related to our features of emotional intelligence and some of our abilities to be socially intelligent and have beliefs that are strong in terms of coping. Next slide. So Rodder's research looked at both internal and external control from people and found that both sets of beliefs are self-validating and self-fulfilling. So those who are external control people, who see the world as being an external control, that is a very self-validating and self-fulfilling response. You can look around and find all kinds of ways to justify, this isn't my fault, it's someone else's fault. You can look around all the time. You can find ways to self-validate your thoughts about the control in your life being blamed or responsible from someone else. Same thing with internal. If you believe that you are responsible for making things better, or you are responsible for getting things done, that it too becomes a very self-validating response, and that feeds on and promotes additional internal control responses. Next slide. There's been a great deal of research on worry. Worry has a relationship to fear, confusion, and poor decision-making when faced with very complex problems. Worry is not compatible with successful leadership. That does not mean that you cannot ever worry as a successful leader, but what it means is you do not take worry to the next level into rumination. So those who take worry into a rumination state are not as effective as others, and that has a relationship to being having a difficult time with very complex problems. Next slide. Learned helplessness is a body of research, and there's a great deal done on learned helplessness, but it's a perceived inability to surmount failure. It's a loss of perceived control over adverse events. And next slide. Some of the most interesting research in learned helplessness is done in children. And Diener and Dweck did work that showed children in situations where they're given a problem that is new or unique to them. And the verbalizations that children had are recorded and studied over time. And studies of learned helplessness in children have shown distinct differences in verbal action about the potential outcome of a problem. So children who had more difficulty were often heard saying, "Oh, I could never solve this problem," or "This is too tough for me," or "This is too difficult." And children who were more resilient and more able to cope with situations had very positive verbalizations. They had verbalizations like, "I know I can figure this out. I know there's a way to do this." And so that is pretty clear research about learned helplessness and how our verbalization creates an expectancy for success. Next slide. So let's talk a bit about it. Expectancy for success. It's a belief held by an individual that in most situations, they would be able to obtain their desired goals. And in most situations, you can obtain your desired goals. And that is an expectancy that you have and a verbalization that can be heard by others or by your self-verbalizations. Those who have higher tolerance for ambiguity have a higher expectancy for success. So that to me is a very interesting thing because we all know people who have very low tolerance for ambiguity. You can get into a situation where the answer to the situation is unknown or the details of the situation are unknown at the time, and those people go crazy. They go crazy with their questions. They cannot deal with that ambiguity or wait or figure out the details later. So those who have that higher tolerance for ambiguity also have a higher expectancy for success, and that relates to resiliency over time. And next slide. There's a huge body of research that deals with hope, and there was, it's out of the University of Kansas, and it is longitudinal studies of people with high hope and people with low hope. And hope is a feature that the role of hope in sports achievement has been studied in its relationship to resiliency. And we understand and know that hope predicts an athletic outcome. And also visualization as a means of expectancy for success also predicts a positive outcome. So athletes that were able to dwell in hope and were able to visualize themselves as having a positive completion of a task were more successful. So there are many, many studies on hope. And next slide. It's critical to the perception that our goals can be met. And higher hope people manifest a sense of well-being and cope more effectively in difficult situations. Next slide. High hope people also have a mindset that will solve problems. And they describe having social networks. You guys in your feedback from your beginning groups talked about having social networks and support networks. So high hope people have those support networks, and they utilize those support networks to create situations that propel them into stronger ability to get through a problem. The other thing they found about high hope people is that they laugh a lot. They use humor to cope, and they have the ability to laugh at themselves and laugh at predicaments, not in negative ways, not in negative ways about themselves, but to use it to think about how to move forward and to get better and to have some humor about it. Next slide. And this is interesting, I think, because they found that high hope is also related to prayer or similar prayer-like activities that increases mental energy in us. So I could go on for an entire session on hope, because it is a critical skill. It is something that lives within some people, but it can be developed, and it is critical to our resiliency. Next slide. And a bit about self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is a key concept in social learning theory, and it is a judgment of how well one can execute needed actions that are required to deal with situations and difficult situations. Next slide. So those who are not resilient tend to dwell in negative emotions. They dwell in fear, in anger, anxiety, helplessness, hopelessness, and worry. And those tend to be people of low hope as well that have those features. Next slide. So a language of hopelessness, this has been found through the research, begins with a belief that this situation is hopeless. This situation is something I'll never get out of. It moves into our language, and our language can be either self-talk, or it can be outgoing language, where we're talking at that level of the belief that we are in a hopeless situation. And it displays itself in our actions then eventually. After our belief, our language, then our actions are developed, and our actions are those of low hope. Next slide. So I want to go through some thoughts in summary. And then if we've got time, we'll break into small groups again. Not sure if we're going to have time here. So resiliency is related to leadership, and that does exist in both the research and in what we know about life in general, that it is related to our ability to lead a group and to become leaders in groups. Resiliency is also related to individual success and to organizational successes, and therefore how we go as an individual does affect the organization, and it does play out eventually in the organizational success. And it's also related to our character and to our emotional intelligence. One next slide, thought about the pain in the situation can wake you up to the truth, and it can help you find and use the good hidden in bad times. Some critical features. Self-talk is a critical feature as we look at resilient people in the way we talk to ourselves and the things that we say to ourselves. Visualization is a critical feature as we begin to visualize ourselves in successful situations or moving through a situation or a task in a successful way. And our expectation for success is a critical feature. And bottom line, people are more successful if they are resilient. Next slide. Some keys, if you want to boil it all down, is practice forgiveness, be a person of high hope, be a person of grace and gratitude, and that will open you up and build a foundation for resiliency. And use stop symbols in your life, and whether it's literally a stop sign that you visualize, whether it's a stopping a hand action that makes you think of a stop, but stopping our own negative self-talk, our anxiety, our worry, our self-pity, and our victimization thoughts. Next slide. A very final thought, resiliency is about more than bouncing back from adversity. It is about acting out of our beliefs. It's about our flexibility in reasoning. It's about our openness to others' knowledge. That is crucial, to be open to others' knowledge. It's our ability to focus on a goal, and as a result, become better leaders and better organizations. So, do we have time here? I'm trying to see. Yeah, we've got a few minutes. Let's take about 8 minutes, go into our groups and think about this question and talk about this question. When you think back on your years in leadership, what are some general thoughts you have on resiliency? Take just a few minutes and we'll come back, and we will not report back this time. We'll just come back for our closure. Thank you. Well, I'm going to close this out now, and I just thank everyone. It has been an absolute pleasure to work with you this year and to work with such intelligent women. I just cannot tell you how much I admire all of you. So I want to close this out with a quote. And this is from Eric Friedman. And it says that we all have battles to fight. And it's often in those battles that we are our most alive. It's on the front line of our lives that we earn wisdom, we create joy, we forge friendship, we discover happiness, we find love, and we do our purposeful work. I thank you all, and I wish you the very happiest of holidays, and have a great new year. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.